Hey there, so I'm so excited to give you a pattern hack today. We're going to turn the Naomi dress View A into this beautiful button-down ruffle dress with a few simple tweaks to the pattern itself. Let's get started.
All right, so let's get started with our supplies. You're going to need some tracing paper. You're going to need some paper scissors to work with this paper, fabric scissors, of course, to cut your fabric. You're going to need some interfacing because we're going to reinforce these buttonholes. You're going to need 6 buttons, either 3/4 of an inch or 1-inch buttons. Something to draw on your paper with. I've got a Sharpie here so you can see it on camera. Pins, of course, or clips, whichever you prefer, and a straight edge ruler. And of course, you're going to need the Naomi pattern. We are going to be working with View A, and if you haven't purchased this pattern yet, you can do so at the link below. So now that we've got our supplies, let's get started. So the pattern we're going to be modifying is the Style Sew Me Naomi pattern. This pattern includes all sizes, extra small to triple XL, and we are going to be working from View A.
So follow me here on the fabric. For 45-inch fabric, if you are an extra small to a small, you'll need to double your fabric. So whatever the fabric chart on the envelope says, double it if you're an extra small to a small. If you are working with a 60-inch fabric and you are between an extra small and a double XL, you're going to double your fabric. All other sizes are same as the envelope. You won't need any extra fabric.
So since we're working from Naomi View A, we're going to be working on only piece number 1 and piece number 2. So go ahead and cut that out. Now, so the first thing that I would suggest that you do is make the fitting adjustments to your original pattern pieces as needed. The reason being is that we are going to take these pieces in their totality and hack them according to this tutorial to make the final look. And it's easier if you just start with the 2 pieces that you have here to make the proper fitting adjustments than to work with more pattern pieces as we start to open this up. So go ahead and take some time now if you need to add some length somewhere. The dress will continue to be its intended length. So make the length adjustments that you need for this dress to hit at the hemline that you want it to hit. Once you've made your fitting adjustments, then come back to the table and let's start hacking this pattern to make this dress. So I've made my pattern adjustments to the front and the back, and I needed to add some length because I'm pretty tall. So this is why I recommend that you get your foundation set first on your pattern, get the fit right, because then we can get to the design details and we know that we are not going to compromise the fit. So definitely, if you felt like you needed to skip this and you'll do it later, I would recommend that you take a pause, do what you need to do, and get your fit together. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our separation between our top of our dress and the ruffled bottom part of the dress. So where the dress curves at the hip, at the base of the hip, you'll want to cut across there. And that is actually where I ended up adding my length. So I'm just going to end up cutting this off what I have already added. But your pattern, you are going to look at where this curve begins to straighten out again. You're going to make a little mark there. Here. And then you're going to take your ruler, draw a line all the way across at that marking, and you're going to cut this off. And we're going to do that on the back piece as well. So I'm going to cut off my front, and actually I'm going to write my labels on here because I like to keep my stuff consistent, get all of that written on here before I start cutting, because if I go and slice this off on both sides when they're almost identical, almost, but not identical, and then I go mix them up, then I can mess up my pattern. So go ahead and write which is 1 and which is 2 on this extension before you cut it off. So I've got that written, and now I'm going to cut this bottom part off. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same for 2. So we're going to set these bottom pieces aside, and we're going to work on the top first. So grab your tracing paper. And lay your pattern piece number 1 on top. So we're going to make some markings to add a facing to the center front of piece number 1. The first line we're going to draw is the width of your button. So we're going to draw out 1 inch. If you're using 1 inch button, if you're using 3/4 of an inch, whichever one you're using, you want to make a line that is 1 inch away from your center. Okay. Then from here, you're going to extend for the facing that's going to be tucked under. You're going to extend this 2 times the width of your button. So for a 1 inch button, that would be 2 inches plus a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you're using a 1 inch button, you're going to draw another line parallel to the one that you just drew that is 2 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to draw some dots that are 2 1/4 inch, and then I'll connect that line. So we're going to mark our buttonholes next. So for our 6 buttons, you are going to essentially eyeball it to make sure that your buttons come out evenly. What you don't want is for your buttons to start directly at the top of your pattern and end directly at the bottom. So you want to give yourself space for seam allowance. I prefer, for this pattern, it is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I like to give myself another 1/2 inch just so this button is not butting up against the very top of the dress. So coming down at least 1 inch, 1 to 1.5 inches, you can put your first mark. Now you can do this in pencil, and you can adjust as you go, okay? So your buttonhole is going to extend across that fold, the original piece, onto your extension, okay? And so you just kind of eyeball it. And again, I'm going to look at the bottom, and I'm going to give myself at least 1 inch, 1.5 inches from the bottom, and I'm going to mark. So as you can see, I have marked too many buttonholes. I only have 6. I marked 7 buttonholes. So that means I'm going to kind of spread these out a little more. I like the position of my first and last one, but I need to spread the rest of them out. So I'm going to get rid of this one, and I'm going to move this one down. Okay, so these are my buttonholes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you have more or less buttons, it is up to you. It is preferable that you use 6 at least, because you don't want that gaping in between your dress when you're wearing it and everybody is seeing your business in between the dress. So I've got my buttonholes marked. I am doing horizontal buttonholes. So when you're looking at the dress, you know, the right side up, the buttonholes are going across my dress.
And so these same buttonhole markings will also serve as your button markings for the left side of your dress. We're simply going to cut 2 on grain instead of on the fold, and then we will capture both sides of the dress.
So now all you do is cut out this new pattern piece. And then I'm going to clean this up around the facing because our V-neck comes down here. I'm going to cut that excess off. So we've got our extension added here. Now, just to give you an eyeball of what this looks like, when you tuck this 1/4 inch under and then you fold it under again, this first line that you drew is your fold line, okay? And then this is what your pattern, your fabric will look like when it's cut out and sewn together. You'll have your buttons here. You've got this extension that overlaps the left side, and this is where you button your dress, okay? So now we've got to draft some facings. So instead of lining this dress the way it was originally designed, we're just going to create a facing for this top piece in the strap so that you will have a nice clean finish. Because both sides of the straps will be seen when you're wearing the dress, so lay out your pattern and then grab your tracing paper. So on camera, you can see my pattern piece here. And here's what we're going to do. Grab your marker and your ruler. And from the side seam, the underarm side seam, measure down about 2 inches. And make a marking. And do that on the edge of the extension you just made as well. This is how deep our facing is going to be. So now I want you to trace all the way around your pattern piece from this point that you created at the side seam and at the extension. Now to close this up, we are just going to kind of eyeball it. If you have a curved or French curve ruler, that may be helpful, but I'm just going to eyeball it by keeping a distance of about 2 inches away from these lines, coming across, tracing it up to about here, and then dipping back down to meet here. So I'm going to poke a little dot right here in the middle, and then I'm going to eyeball it, staying parallel to the line that I've already drawn. Bam, just like that. Now I also want you, while you're here, to add a grain line directly in the middle of your pattern piece, making sure that it is parallel with these straight lines. And we are going to name it front facing Naomi. Okay? And then that's it. You're going to cut this piece out. And now we're going to repeat the same process for the back. Okay, so we've made all of the adjustments to our pattern pieces. You should now have the following pieces: a back facing, a front facing, piece number 2, piece number 1 with the button extension on it, and the bottoms of your dress, piece number 1 and 2. We are not going to be adjusting these, and you're like, Erin, well, how the heck are we supposed to get that gathered fullness? Well, I'm going to show you when we cut it out. So these are the pieces that you should have. Now I'm going to move on to showing you how to cut out these pieces. So grab your fabric and let's get started on that.
So I am laying out my wrinkled fabric right sides together, folded with the selvages up top and the fold facing me. The first thing I'm going to do is cut out my bottom pieces of my dress. So grab those 2 bottom pieces, and honestly you really don't need them, but just for the sake of using them, since we have them, go ahead and grab them. You're going to place the folded edge of the pattern piece on the fold of your fabric. Simple enough, right? And you're just going to use that pattern piece for the purpose of using its width. And you're going to cut all the way across your fabric. So it doesn't matter if you have 45-inch wide fabric or 60-inch wide or anything in between. You're just going to use that whole strip of fabric. If your fabric is on the wider side, then you're just going to have a more full ruffle, which will be very, very pretty. So it doesn't matter. Just cut all the way across using that edge of that pattern piece as your guide. And you're going to do that on both of those pattern pieces. So you should end up with 2 strips on the fold. And for your facings, you're going to place your back facing on the fold, and your front facing you can place above it because that's on the grain. And you're going to cut one of the back facing on the fold, and you're going to cut 2 of the front facing. And the back of your dress you're going to cut as normal on the fold. And on the front you're going to cut 2. So since this pattern piece was originally on the fold, we're going to be cutting it actually on the grain line. And since it doesn't have a grain line, I'm just using the straight edge of the folded edge of the center front of the original pattern piece as my grain line. And lastly, go through on both pieces of your front of your dress and mark the buttonhole and button markings on your fabric.
So we've got all our pieces cut out. You should now have the left front, the right front. Put those together. The back on the fold, front facing, back facing, and you should have 1 back facing cut on the fold, 2 back facing cut together, and you should have the bottom of piece number 2 and the bottom of piece number 1. So now that we've got our pattern adjusted, we have got everything cut out, it's time to sew.